questions throughout the entirety of the webinar. So as we get questions in our Q&A box, I'll be fielding them to our panelists. So do remember to include those throughout the beginning of this webinar series. So to first, please, Katie, introduce yourself and your journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm really excited to get into the Q&A later, but happy to talk a little bit about my path and journey to starting a company to begin with. So I am CEO and co-founder of 6line Semiconductor. We are a spin out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the United States. And our main goal is really to enable this next generation of highly energy efficient, high performance, fast electronics. And the way that we do that is by using new semiconductor materials. So I come from a more technical background throughout so I did a undergrad in engineering physics and then a master's and PhD in materials science at UW-Madison. And throughout my entire academic and research career, because I was also involved a lot in undergraduate research in my undergrad, one thing that I've found is that I'm very motivated to work on technology and to solve problems if I can see a real world impact and application. So if I can really understand where, the problem that I'm solving is going to potentially impact real people and real technology, that's where it becomes a problem where, or an obsession to me, where I'm like, this is something that I need to work on and I need to solve. So throughout my PhD, this was why I joined my PhD lab, is because I looked at the research problems that my advisor was trying to solve, and I could really see how if we could overcome these really long-standing challenges in this specific field, then this technology could have a huge impact and essentially like revolutionize, not only your computers and your cell phones, but also have wide-reaching impacts to other applications like sensors and displays. So this was why I was really excited to join my PhD lab, and why I was really passionate about my PhD work from the beginning. And so during my PhD work, that led to the development of a few patents that ultimately ended up being the heart of the technology, or the technology at the heart of 6line eventually. But those patents are owned by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and licensed to 6line after the fact. But when we went through that patenting process when I was a graduate student, that's really when I started thinking more seriously about starting a company, because I could understand more clearly the value that the technology had. Not only, I could see this impact that the technology could have, but when it becomes patented, then that puts your technology in a competitive, or sets the technology up in kind of a competition or a competitive advantage towards other technologies, because it's valuable enough that you need to protect it. So I will say that I did not start my undergrad or PhD really wanting to start a company or even really knowing what starting a company meant. But it was really when we developed this IP and started thinking about the value of this technology, and also that I, was so passionate about this technology. And if I really wanted to make an impact on people's lives and like real world applications, the next step would be to actually be the person to take the technology from a lab benchtop and actually push it out into commercialization. So that's when I started thinking about it kind of seriously at that point, and talked to my advisor about it, and he was also interested at that point as well. But I ended up defending my PhD in 2020, kind of during the height of COVID. So there was a lot of uncertainty about a lot of things at that time. So I ended up doing a postdoc at Northwestern University, where I worked on wearable and implantable bioelectronics. And my postdoc experience was amazing for multiple reasons. But one of them was that my postdoc lab was so incredibly entrepreneurial, where multiple startup companies that have come out of the lab, where one of them recently raised a Series B round of funding. So more longevity in funding and longevity of the company. These are successful companies. So it was me getting to be in this lab and getting to see these other PhD students and these other postdocs starting these companies, and the companies at various stages as they came back and either utilized the lab or interacted with the current students, that really started to kind of remove some of those prior lack of understandings that I had around what does it actually look like to start a company? What does that mean? What does that process look like? So it was a super valuable experience. And when my postdoc ended, I was still really interested in starting a company. So I contacted my PhD advisor to see if he was also interested. And then he was. And so we kind of assembled a small core team of part-time technical and business advisors, and then started Six Line in September of 2022. So we're still a very, very relatively fresh and new company. And initially, when we started Six Line, I was working without a salary, so I was just working for equity, because I was fortunate enough to have a significant other or partner that supported us financially. But that was kind of a difficult time until I was awarded an Activate Fellowship, which, if you're not familiar with the Activate Fellowship, is an entrepreneurship national in the US fellowship that supports both the founder and then also the company, both financially, but also setting up kind of a network of mentors and peers and training. So I would highly recommend you look into that fellowship if you're eligible and interested in thinking about starting a hard tech focused company. But I was awarded this fellowship, which was huge for the company and for myself. And then Six Line was also awarded a phase 1 grant from the NSF in 2023. And so that allowed us to hire our first materials engineer. And then since then, we have additionally added a senior research scientist, because we were able to bring in some dilutive VC or venture capitalist money, and also delivered paid pilot samples in 2024 to continue not only getting customer feedback, but also generating revenue and continuing to support the company. So the Activate Fellowship was, hugely instrumental in providing the kind of the non-technical aspects of starting a company to me. But I was also really lucky to have a part-time business advisor kind of involved in the team from the beginning. And we can get into the Q&A later, but I just want to emphasize that, if you're from a technical background and you're looking at starting a company, do not underestimate the importance of a business advisor or a business partner to the success of your company. These are a lot of things that I had no idea about, such as incorporation or setting up a cap or ownership table, appropriate legal filings. And I was lucky because I had that business advisor from the beginning. But I have known other hard tech founders where their companies have had to close, not due to the technology or not due to problems with product market fit, but just because they didn't set up the company correctly. And so then they essentially had to start from scratch. So if you get one takeaway from my story and from this webinar, from my section at least, please don't underestimate the importance of business advisors or business partners. Please seek out that information and try and find people who are smarter than you in those areas to try and set yourself up for success. So thank you so much. Happy to answer more questions later.
Thank you, Katie. Tom.
Yeah, great, thank you. I'm going to show a few slides, and let me just get through those, but here we go. Oh, is the whole slideshow showing?
Yes, we see it.
Great. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach, but I'll give you a little bit of my background, and then I'll provide some practical advice for building your business. I was a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Katie's same alma mater, in material science and engineering, and I was developing an atomic scale imaging technology that is very capable, but at the time it was, I'll say, very slow. You collect 1 atom per second, and what I wanted to do was find a way to speed it up, and we did. We found a way to speed it up by 4 orders of magnitude. That took it from the realm of a scientific curiosity to a commercially viable opportunity. And so I started looking at starting a company, and one of the things is I'm staring a really interesting opportunity in the face and wondering, well, I've got my day job here. Do you pursue that? And I did. I decided, you got to grasp the moment, and I felt like if I 20 years later looked back and didn't do it, I might have not been very happy with myself. At any rate, I started Imago Scientific Instruments. I'll tell you a little bit more about it as you see in these slides, but then I was with that company until 2018. We got acquired. In 2018, I left and I started Steam Instruments, and we're building a similar type of imaging mass spectrometers, but I won't go into that today. So what I wanted to do was address a couple of the questions that I thought were especially important, and ones that I felt I had seen in my experience. And the first one was, how do you attract seed funding? And before you even think about attracting any seed funding or any funding at all, you really have to understand what is the market opportunity that you are pursuing. Is it worth pursuing other people's money to try to make it happen? Are you looking at raising $2 million for something that could be a $10 million a year opportunity? Or are you looking for $10 million to pursue a $2 million a year opportunity? Those are very different scenarios, especially for investors. And as Katie was saying, you may or may not have the background and skills to do that yourself. You probably would do well to bring in some professional advice, and I'll speak to that more. Similarly, once you decide you understand the opportunity, it has to be big enough to support the money that's going to take to get to it. And then you have to write basically a business plan for how to do that. And that's what the next set of bullet points are. How do you take that opportunity and address it? Who is the competition that you're going to be fighting? Will they let you operate freely, or do they have a way to stop you? What kind of infrastructure and resources are needed, and when do you need them, and so on. And I'll just give you an example of what it might look like if you're going to try to raise money. I mentioned you will need to first and foremost understand what is the market opportunity, and you may or may not get some free advice. You may have to pay a consultant to help, but I strongly recommend you, unless you have reason to believe you know what to do, you should bring in some professional advice. And similarly with a business plan, once you have a credible market assessment that can be one of the chapters on a business plan, now you have to fill out how do you go after that logistically and with infrastructure and so on, and what's it going to cost? How do you take investment money and convert that to a real business? Before you start raising any money, you're going to have to write a private offering memorandum. This is the Securities and Exchange Commission requires that you can't just go out and hang a shingle and ask for money. You have to prepare a legal document, and that can cost you $30,000. So be aware that you haven't even started yet. You may have already spent some money on some advisors, but you also need to get the legal side of it in place. And so then that is all the pre-seed financing and activity. And then maybe you're ready to do some proof of concept work. And if you want to raise a seed round, let's say you think with all the thinking you've put into it so far, your company's worth, say, $2 million. Maybe you have a patent in there too. If you raise $500,000 after you put $500,000 of cash into a $2 million proposition, you've got a $2.5 million company. And that $500,000 represents 20% of that. And so you've just sold 20% of the company. And went on and on. Then maybe a few years later, you got your proof of principle, and you need to expand and buy equipment and build a manufacturing facility. Maybe you think at this point, well, the company's worth $10 million, I'm going to raise $5 million. You've just sold another third of the company, and so on. Series B, you might sell another 37%. At any rate, the point is that if you have any delusion, if you're going to need money to build a company, you're not going to be left with a whole lot of the equity at the end. The investors will have probably, in this case, that scenario, you'll have 10% left for all the founders. So be aware of that, but you may not have any other way to do it. Just to give you a little sense of what I went through, I was a professor at the university, and in those early stages, I needed to do a market assessment and build a business plan and so on. And so I remortgaged my house and started doing this stuff. I hired an employee, and then I needed to write this business plan, hire people, find space, raise money, and all of that is a demanding job in itself. And I had a day job, which was very demanding. So I was finding that things had stalled. I wasn't making much progress because I didn't have the time. So I finally looked into taking a leave of absence, but I had just remortgaged my house, and I needed to raise some money to do that. And so the question is, how could I, for example, even cover a year's worth of my salary just to get all of the, raise more money and stuff like that? Well, fortunately, my mother said, "Oh, I can give you some money." And not everybody will have that opportunity, but just to point out that sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And in this case, this is what got me going when I had no other opportunities. And that money that my mother provided is right in the August 99 tranche, if you will. So just to give you a sense of what I went through, I raised $400 from a couple of partners. In the end, I was the only one of those 4 partners who stuck with things, but then I took some money out of my home equity loan, I remortgaged, took another chunk out, promising I wouldn't lose the house. My mother gave me some money, and that all allowed us to write a private offering memorandum and start raising money from friends and family, and including my mother retroactively. And so then you can see the numbers keep going up. I then moved on to angel investors, which are private investors, and eventually this slide shows I raised, say, $23 million in order to build up manufacturing, hire engineers, and on and on. All right, I'm going to switch a little and finish up with this. Another question was, how do you protect your intellectual property from competitors? Well, what is intellectual property? First of all, most people think of it as patents, but you must consider that trade secrets are an essential component of intellectual property, and sometimes more important. Patents have a 20-year life, and they do have their important role. But trade secrets, like the recipe for Coca-Cola, is 150 years old. They last indefinitely, as long as you can maintain the secret. You also need to understand when you have information and you want to provide it, you have to provide it sometimes to people. You better do it under a non-disclosure agreement, and I won't get into the details, but so what do you consider intellectual property? As I said, most people think patents when you think of intellectual property, but I need to emphasize trade secrets can even be more important in many cases. And we certainly have developed things that there's no way we're going to patent them. We're just going to keep them to ourselves. If somebody else figures it out, well, we can't control that. But you should also remember there are other things like trademarks and copyrights that constitute part of your intellectual property portfolio. So if you have a great trademark or copyright on something that is worth something, that's important to know. And then, so why do you want to build an intellectual property portfolio? The most important thing, and the second most, and the third most important thing, is freedom to operate. Most people think you're patenting things to block competitors from doing what you're doing. But more importantly, no, it's generally freedom to operate so that you can do it. And there's more than one way to achieve freedom to operate. You can patent something, and then at least you have the patent. You may or may not go after somebody. But you can also just publish a paper. Then it's in the public domain, and nobody can stop you from doing it. It's a much less expensive way to do it, and it's something to consider. But patents also, for example, increase the value of the company and can be bargaining chips in intellectual property battles later on. You might consider your strategy or your business model. Are you trying to build the highway or build the semiconductors, or develop how to do it and sell the license or the know-how to somebody? So would you want to own the highway or just own the toll booth? And they're very different, but they can be equally lucrative and important. If any of you are at a university, you probably have a technology transfer office, and you should understand that the TTO is like the mafia. Why do I say that? Well, a lot of people think, this is my idea. I want to patent it myself. Why should they be the ones that get the patent? Well, okay, but what happens if some big corporation, like General Motors or whatever, they decide, oh, I like that or whatever, and they're practicing it. Well, sure, you have a patent, so you send them a letter and say, stop, cease and desist. And they might say, go away. All right, so now they're still doing it. What do you do? Well, you can take them to court, but that's going to cost you a couple $1,000,000 probably just to take them to court. Do you have that money? Do you have that time? Probably not. So if the technology transfer office owns it, then they have typically maintain a reputation for defending their patents, and the big corporation has to think twice about whether to continue. And so you have to pay royalties to the technology transfer office. You pay 2 cents, 3 cents for every dollar you take in. After you take in the dollar, you give them a cut. All right, and this is like how the analogy with the mafia goes. And you're also free to make your own patents supplementing your existing one from your technology transfer office. So I'm just going to finish out by saying that you must learn to guard your knowledge, and most people think that's your technical ideas, but it goes beyond that. You've got to protect any plans you have. You don't want people to know where you're headed, what you're trying to do. You also, let's say you spend 3 months finding a vendor to make it something that is essential for you, and then another 6 months figuring out how to make it and working with them to make it so it works. You don't want your competitor to find out and just walk right in and say, "Oh, I need some of those." And under things like, what problems have you encountered when you were developing your project? Well, if the competition doesn't know whether this is even feasible, they'll have second thoughts about spending money on it. But if they see, oh, these guys have already done it, we at least know it's possible to do, then it makes a much easier decision to decide I'm going to invest money on it. And lastly, you must be very careful who you allow into the tent, if you will, meaning if you let somebody visit and they walk around and see, oh, they've got this over there and an SCM over there, well, I wonder what they're doing. They might figure it out, and it's very possible. And I've had this problem. I had a guy come in, he went and figured out something, submitted a patent, and eventually we sued him and he sued us back for $140 million. So it does happen. Just be very careful at who you allow to be in the scenario. All right, I'll finish with that.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so we have our last panelist. Greg, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. And thank you to AVS for giving me this opportunity to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. I feel like I could spend the next 2 hours just kind of a stream of consciousness about all sorts of things that I've encountered over the last 35 years of my business career. And I guess I'll start with a quick note that I think people tend to equate entrepreneurship with the idea of starting a company. And that's certainly the focus of what we're here for. And that's what I'll talk about. I would encourage anybody who's not sure if they're an entrepreneur or not sure if they're ready to be a company entrepreneur to think of entrepreneurship in a broader sense. I think anybody can be entrepreneurial. I think you can be entrepreneurial in your personal life. I think you can be entrepreneurial in how you do your job at a company or at a university. I think of it as somebody who's willing to, take a risk, do things that nobody asked them to do, is kind of curious, obsessed to learn things, willing to be vulnerable. And if you practice that in your other, in your life, your job, whatever, then I think you'll find whether or not it's really kind of core to who you are. I personally didn't think I was an entrepreneur for the first large chunk of my life, and I only kind of discovered my inner entrepreneur over the last 17 years or so. So I'll tell you a little bit about that story. But I'm the founder and CEO of Covalent Metrology. We are a 70-person analytical services company based in Silicon Valley. We have a 30,000 square foot lab in Sunnyvale with a lot of electron microscopy, TEMs, FibSems, SEMs. We have a lot of analytical chemistry. We have a lot of material properties analysis. We do a lot of failure analysis of various components and electronics. We have a $20 million profitable, knock on wood, barely profitable business. Still paying off this big lab that we've built over the past 7-8 years. 400 customers and growing. We have about 60% in semiconductor. So we deal with companies that make the machines that make the wafer, process the wafers. We deal with chip companies. We deal with materials companies. But we also work a lot in batteries, biotech, lab on a chip, even pharmaceutical, sensors, all sorts of different industries, 30 different industries. And so my journey is a little bit different, I think, because I have been a business person. I'm not I don't have a PhD. I'm not a professor. So maybe my path is a little bit different here. And we've got a service business. We're not a technology company. And it's very different, I think, to start a service company. I mean, we don't have any software entrepreneurs represented here, but it's also quite different and quite plausible to be a software entrepreneur. And that's a different journey. So I'll speak a little bit from my own journey starting a service business. So I actually studied Japanese studies, worked in business, went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Business School, worked on Wall Street for a little bit, was even chief financial officer of a consumer products company once upon a time. But I had Silicon Valley roots, and 9/11 caused a pivot in my life. I was about to go back into banking, and those jobs evaporated at the time of 9/11. So I ended up getting a job just out of necessity, kind of humbly taking a big pay cut and coming back to Silicon Valley and joining Applied Materials as a strategy person. And found that I was pretty bored at Applied doing strategy, and I wanted something real to do, or what felt more real to me. So I found a product. I was offered an opportunity to be a product manager, an e-beam inspection tool for TFT LCD manufacturing. Had some success learning that technology, getting into the market, and then they gave me another product to run, and then I ended up being in the right place at the right time to start Applied Materials thin film solar business. So we did thin film silicon deposition on very large sheets of glass. We were selling turnkey factories. We called it Sunfab. I launched that, was the founding general manager of that in 2005. So this was an entrepreneurship journey. I started a division of Applied Materials, and that grew to $2.5 billion in bookings over the next couple of years before the whole solar flameout in 2008, 2009. So I kind of briefly, I had left before the flameout. I went to Sequoia Capital. So I was it's called an entrepreneur in residence at Sequoia Capital, which is a venture capital firm. And then I was at a combinatorial material science R&D and IP licensing company called Intermolecular. I started their clean energy group. We went public, and then I was the head of sales and marketing. So that's the background. It's kind of a weird kind of half business, half general management and technology. Some key things along that journey. When I was at Applied, I discovered my entrepreneurial instincts and just had a passion for building something. You heard Katie talking about her obsession. Sometimes people say you become a founder starter when you have a compulsion and you have no choice. You feel like you have, like, that's the only thing you could do. And Thomas, with his journey, I respect the hell out of anybody that went through that and took mortgages, and incredible, to have that kind of dedication and passion. So I kind of discovered that later in my life, I think in my late 30s. And I really didn't test it fully until 2016, when I had a client. I was doing some consulting, and somebody said, they were trying to get some atomic force microscopy measurements, and they went to the local outsourced lab here, and it was like $500 an image, and it was going to take 2 to 3 weeks. And I thought that was crazy, and that it should be a lot faster and cheaper. So I started thinking about material science innovation as an ecosystem. Now, my perspective was late in career. I had done, business school, trained in business school. So I kind of thought about it as an industry, as a case study. And I thought about how impactful it could be if you had an outsourced lab that was modern and software enabled and aggressive and customer centered, and provided you fast, cheap data when that's what you needed, and provided you really great solutions if that's what you needed, and leveraging the same technical expertise and the same infrastructure. So I had this idea, but I hadn't technically been in this metrology and characterization industry per se. So I decided to test it. I had some consulting business. And I went, and because I had been frugal, or more precisely, because I'd been smart to marry somebody who had been even more frugal than me and kept me from spending a lot of money along the way. So we had a small house, and we had no mortgage, and we had money in the savings account. I was able to go buy a $350,000 atomic force microscope from my retirement savings and say, I'm going to hang up my shingle and just start offering this as a kind of an Uber side hustle kind of a thing. And so for a year and a half, my analytical services startup, which kind of started as an LLC, got renamed to another LLC, and then got incorporated into a C Corp in November of 2017. It went from being a side hustle to being my full-time obsession. And I've been at it ever since, and scaled it up. We've raised $27 million in total. 6 million of that from industry partners, people that make the instruments, and the rest from private individuals. And honestly, I couldn't have done that earlier in my career. I went to business school, and flash forward 20 years, A lot of the people I went to business school ended up being wealthy. And so they had money to invest in people that they liked and trusted. And so I was able to take advantage of that. So my capital journey, which turned out to be a lot more capital to get to profitability than I expected, was only possible because I had money myself to put in. I had to go for a couple of years without salary. I had to take a mortgage at one point in time to get us through some rough times. Like I was personally prepared to do that and had a spouse who was mostly supportive of doing that. And but then I had this network. So anyway, that's kind of the background. I have all sorts of things that if anybody wants to chat about ideas, I mean, there are so many maxims and truisms. Be quick to fire, slow to hire, be very frugal, maintain flexibility, just kind of like really, really think about you don't know where your journey is going to go. And so flexibility is just so valuable. I would caution you to be open and vulnerable and to test your idea with a lot of people. Depends a little bit. Understanding Thomas's comment about having some IP theft as a possibility. So for some people, that's something to be very mindful of. But what I've seen too often is particularly young entrepreneurs who think their stuff is so special, and that if they just whisper it to somebody that at another company, they're going to wake up and change what they do tomorrow. And the reality is that most 95% of the people out there will hear your idea, even if you completely disclosed it to them, and they'll come up with 20 reasons why it won't work. And they're not going to do anything different the next day. So what you're really looking for is valuable feedback. But I have a quick, or I hope quick, kind of framework you might use to think about starting a company. The who, what, where, when, why, how. So I think there's a particular order that you might consider going through. I would start with the what. What are you really talking about? Is this a technology company? So in the case of Katie, is she developing IP? Is she going to sell wafers? Is she going to sell materials? Or is she going to sell equipment? Or is she going to actually be a device company? There's lots of places in the value chain. In the case of Thomas, are you developing sensors that you want to like build a whole integrated system, and then find somebody who can do global sales and service at some point, so you're naturally going to sell to somebody else when it comes time to scale up? You have to think about what the eventual, what are you building? How does it eventually scale up? And then kind of work back. There's business model, there's technology. And so kind of really analyze the industry and analyze who are the participants in the ecosystem, understand what do they like? Are they aggressive? Are they acquisition oriented? Do they do partnerships? Or are they really conservative and they hate working with outsiders and everything's NIH? So that's the what. Then the who. Do you want to be a sole founder? Do you want to be a co-founder? What are the core competencies you really need to make this work? There's pros and cons. I used to think I had to be a co-founder. My first kind of failed startup effort in 2008 was with a technical co-founder. And then the financial meltdown kind of was one of the key reasons why that thing didn't work out. But I didn't have the confidence at that stage in my career that I could be a solo founder. But later in my life, my older brother was kind of like a coach, executive coach. Actually, he is an executive coach, but he was coaching me, and he was like, you just got to get over that and realize that you can do it on your own. And so the second time I had the confidence to say, no, I don't need a co-founder. I can do this on my own. If you do have a co-founder who's awesome and brings credibility and brings skills you don't have and core competencies that are going to be crucial, it can be easier to attract funding, because in some ways, people, particularly at an early stage in your career, they're going to look and say, who's the team? But keep in mind that it's like getting married. And, many companies break up because the co-founders didn't really know each other well enough, and they didn't really understand what's your motivation. Are you ready to go to the mattresses as much as I'm willing to go to the mattresses? Like, why are you in this? So the whole who aspect, you really, really think through who is the team. And then I think the next one is why. Why are you doing this? Because if you're doing it to get rich, then I would say don't. Like, there's many better ways to make money. So risk adjusted on almost every case, unless you happen to be like the who's who of Gen AI right now, and you've got the next best open AI, I would say, it's not a good way to make money. Are you doing it for like fame or glory? That's terrible. It's humbling. It's like it's just so humbling to start a company. You're constantly asking for money, and everyone's like, why are you doing this? And so you just have to be ready to be humble. So why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you really want to build something and you can't stand the idea that this doesn't exist in the world? Or are you doing it because you want to call your own shots and don't want a boss, and you want to be able to take vacation when you want. So we think like startups should always be like big companies. A lot of people, you might be starting a one-person consulting business, or you might want to just hang out your shingle and do something where, you know, they're called lifetime or quality of life businesses, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. There's lots of quality of life businesses, and that could be a great thing to do. But why are you doing it? And then you get to the how. And the how is where people tend to spend a lot of time, and it's obviously very hard. I would recommend on the how to work backwards, try to imagine what's the outcome, and really say, where are we going? Are we going to sell this and try to build $1 billion company? Are we going to build it to this and then sell the IP or sell a component or the drawings, whatever it is? You got to think backwards and then think about the capital journey that you're going to have to go on. And one thing I would just, as a caveat, Thomas, technically what you said about the private placement memo at $30,000, I'm a little concerned you might scare some people off. That's actually not true. If your number of investors is less than 99 and you're dealing with accredited individuals. So I've raised 27 million. We never had a private placement memo. And I would say most Silicon Valley startups I know never write a private placement memo, but you do have to write a private placement memo if you're going to be involving investors that the SEC think could be abused or taken advantage of. So it kind of depends on your capital strategy. I'm suspecting Katie never wrote one, but I'm just guessing. So by the way, I'm on the leadership council of Activate, and it's a fantastic program. I love Activate. I've been working with those guys for 8 years. So I highly recommend people check out Activate if you don't know about it. So your capital journey has to be aligned with your vision of how you're going to build the company. Are you going to need to raise $200 million? Well, you're going to have to find venture capital and growth equity capital. And that's, you got to have a scaling function. You've got to have a sector that's financeable. And many, many, many ideas are not financeable for that kind of money. You can find friends and family money to get started, but if your capital journey is not going to be doable for $5 million, you really have to understand what investors think like and what are they looking for. If you need somebody to write a big check, you need to understand, like, what are those guys looking for? And if your business is not a multi-billion dollar, it used to be $1 billion, tell me the $1 billion story for your company. That's not even good enough anymore. It's actually like 5 billion now. If you can't tell me the $5 billion story, then venture capital, traditional venture capital, no interest in talking to you. And so you really got to think about, who's going to, and if it's not a traditional venture thing, great, no problem. It might be that you can find partners. The partner or customer money is the best money. If you can get, without giving away, field of use rights that are too bad, if you can get people that care about your technology that are in your ecosystem to fund your idea, that's fantastic. Non-dilutive financing, it's demonstration of credibility, it's demonstration that people want what you're doing. So just you can get it from industry partners, you can get it from customers, you can get it from friends and family, you can get it from family offices. It's a complex world out there, but your capital journey has to align with what your kind of vision is. And only after going through all that, then you can think, well, when is now in your personal life or in the industry, is this the right time to be doing it? A lot of companies have great technology, but they're too early. So maybe the roadmap's not quite there. CNTs for semiconductors is a fantastic technology. It's really interesting to see when will it come into production? Who will it come into production with? Is TSMC going to be driving it on their own? And so how is Katie's company going to fit into that ecosystem and that roadmap? So really interesting conversations. I'd love to have them sometime with you, Katie, if you're open to that chat. And so that's the when. And then finally, the where. And that's kind of the last thing. Like, are you going to do this in Silicon Valley? Are you going to do this at your university? Where's the talent that you need? Where's the capital that you need? And really think about the where. So maybe that framework is helpful, but it's, I would say the main reason you might think about doing a startup, I rarely meet people that start a company that regret it, even when it doesn't work out well. It's really fulfilling to try. You have to appreciate it for the journey. And if you're only going to be happy if you have a successful outcome, then it's tough. Most are not a successful outcome. But if you love the effort and you love the journey and you just feel like you have to give it a try, then it can be a fantastic thing to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. I actually have a couple of questions that I think can be built off of the framework you mentioned. So I'm going to read two of them, and I think they sort of go together. So one is asking how you actually do a market assessment, and the other is where and how do you shop for a business advisor as you're trying to work through the scaffolding of getting your company started.
You want to
and
take
the
that,
floor is
Thomas, or?
open.
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. In our case, we're in Madison, Wisconsin, and the University of Wisconsin has a very good business school. And we ended up talking to some people at the business school, and they have so many people who take entrepreneurship programs and working on MBAs and so on. There's a lot of available free talent, and it's actually was a very important resource for us. In fact, the person who ran the MBA program, the professor, the very senior professor, got interested in what we were doing, and he would steer people towards us, and so we got a lot of help. But I did hire a business advisor, somebody. The city of Madison, for example, was very interested in seeing startup companies created and flourish, and so they have an office that provides resources, and they provided names of business advisors. And so I did hire a business advisor to help with the market assessment. And very quickly, you can do sort of two different ways: a top-down assessment, where like who's going to buy what, and so, or bottom-up assessment, which is somebody will need 10 of these per day for every business day, and so on, and you figure out how many of these things have to be purchased and or whatever. The ideal situation is the top down and the bottom up give about the same number, and then you have at least some reason to believe that they can't be too crazy. But as a scientist engineer, I did not know how to do a market assessment, and I relied on professional help. Finish with that.
JD, I don't know if you want to mention anything.
Yeah, I will. I will also say for business advisors, yeah, definitely the universities that you are connected with is a great resource. In the tech transfer office as well is how we got introduced to our business advisor. But there have been other companies that I know in the Activate network where their business advisors, they were primarily found by just doing lots of customer discovery and just discovery interviews in the ecosystem where they would message people and try and understand, their history and their path and get their expertise and recommendations. And then some of them just kind of clicked. And so then they were able to find a business advisor that way. So, look near to you, locally, but also definitely don't be afraid to email and just message people and try and talk with them.
I would say also that, listen, a lot of you are PhDs in very challenging fields. Business is not that hard. You should absolutely be respectful of the fact that it is a real thing, and there are big mistakes that you can make. But if you have an aspiration to be a founding CEO, you should be watching YouTube videos and doing online courses and trying to educate yourself as much as you can. And you'll pick up some of the basics for sure. I'm always a little leery of the get a business advisor because most business advisors I've met are really pretty poor, and so it's a probability game. You might get lucky and get a fantastic one who can really do great for you, but I would say 60-70% chance the person's not going to be that awesome. But it kind of depends on where you look and how they found and how recommended they are. But one of the things I would say is if you're thinking about anything like this, you should absolutely be buying a premium subscription to LinkedIn. It's $500 a year, at least last I checked. And you should be a relentless networker and trying to go out and find, you could probably go to GPT and say, conduct a value chain assessment of the such and such industry, and then start working on the prompts and trying to refine it. And you might come up with interesting sources, or maybe you do it with Perplexity so you can see where the sources are coming from. But there's a lot of resources online. And once you get yourself basically educated, start guerrilla tactics, trying to connect with people in the ecosystem that you think would know more about that, and just be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm a postdoc at such and such. I'm thinking about starting a company. I would love 5 minutes of your time if you don't mind. And what you find is most people will ignore you, but look for hints on their profile. If they post a lot, if they have a lot of connections, then they probably are people that are open to, talking and building their network on LinkedIn. And they might be excited to find out about your technology and what you're up to. So really, really, and I think there's some sort of, what's it called? The something corp from NSF that teaches you. Katie probably knows.
HiCorp.
Yeah, I-Corp.
Uh,
So a lot of people that come into the Activate program have gone through that, and it's taught them how to go like do customer interviews and try to map out the value chain and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's really valuable if you could do that.
We have a couple of other questions that have come in regarding funding. So one is if you have any thoughts on seeking non-dilutive funds like the SBIR grants versus dilutive VC funds for when you're just starting a company. And another question, sort of how you go about getting that seed funding to begin with.
I would say I'll take a first attempt. I would say at least in my field for technical, a hard tech company, definitely prioritize SBIR funding as much as possible before you take VC or dilutive funding. Especially, I mean, if you start, you might start with like angels and like family and friends where they have a shorter, or they have more patience for their money back. But once you take like real VC capital, then it kind of starts you on like a timeline of you need to, make me X money back by, 5 years, 7 years, or like the timeline of the fund. So I think the SBIR programs are super valuable for not only providing you that initial funding for the company, but also working through maybe some of the initial de-risking that you might still need to do for your technology before you commercialize. And it also is another kind of check mark for before you go and raise, angels or family and friends rounds. Seeing that you're able to bring in other money as well, I think is also really valuable.
I would jump in and say I think that's great. And Katie's comment about the timeline of the VC funds and the road they're going to put you on is dead on. Like be careful of that. But I think that's a good reason not to take VC funding. I think concern for dilution is not a good reason. If you can get money, take it with the caveat that you got to be able to deliver. I see far too often people are like, well, what's my percentage? And listen, you take money when you can get it. It's hard to get money for hard tech startups, and so if you have the opportunity, don't promise something that you can't deliver with pretty reasonable confidence. But SBIRs, as long as the SBIR is aligned with what you otherwise wanted to do to develop a commercial tech, and you don't. I've seen lots of companies that become the Walking Dead for decades of just living SBIR to SBIR over the years, and so just be mindful of the fact that that's a great way to, like, if your technology maybe is really 10 years out, that's a great way to get to, like, 3 or 4 years in before you're ready for the bigger stage of funding. But it's not really commercial validation. So getting industry money, if you can get a customer to pay what's called NRE, non-recurring engineering funds, as Katie mentioned, getting paid wafers, right? I mean, that's fantastic. If you can show that this company cares enough about your technology that they're willing to pay for samples, or they're willing to pay for an NRE where maybe they get some commercial advantage in a very narrow field of use. And so you're not really trading away the thing that you care about the most, but you're finding a partner who can validate that they care about whether your technology can work. That source of non-diluting funding is, it's not that it's non-dilutive. I think that, like, I almost don't like using that word because yes, it is non-dilutive, but that's not the point. The point is that it's industry validating. It's that somebody in the industry really cares enough about your technology, but don't overthink the dilution thing. At the end of the day, having 90% of zero is still zero.
Yeah, I'll just add a little on that. The SBIR takes a long time. If you write a proposal for 3 months and then submit it, and another 6 or 8 months later you find out you got funded, and now you got 6 months of funding, and you go through that, and then you write another proposal for a phase 2, and you wait another 8 months, and then you find out. All right, so you're 3 years in at this point. That's all great. It's non-dilutive and it's excellent money, and there's an element of validation. So the question to you is, what is your time frame? If you've got an opportunity whose window is closing, you may not have 3 years, and so you may have no choice but to find capital more quickly, and it might be dilutive. At any rate, I'll just finish by saying that at Imago, I basically went for hiring a lot of engineers quickly because we wanted to get this thing done. And now with Steam Instruments, we've actually gone the non-dilutive route, and we've got several large SBIR grants. We're not in a super hurry right now, and we still own 100% of the company. But at some point, we're going to need to scale up, and we'll probably take in investment at that point.
Thank you. There's another question regarding infrastructure, especially for hard tech companies. So how do you gain access to infrastructure if you're independent of a university or some other pre-existing structure to work within? And then is being a professor the best approach to have access to these facilities if you are trying to start out building a hard tech company, despite the institution having rights to ownership of your ideas?
Well, I can give a perspective as someone who's not a professor. So we actually pay as an industry user to use University of Wisconsin-Madison lab facilities. So a lot of universities will have that type of option where we still maintain control over our IP that we develop, but we just pay a fee to be able to use the instruments. So that's one route as a possibility, so that you can still maintain control, but you do have to pay.
Yeah, I'll add that that's very important, and we use this all the time. Universities, in some ways, supplement their finances by selling time on their instruments, and they've got a lot of extra time on scanning electron microscopes and otherwise. But you may, if you know there's a company that would be very interested to see your technology exist. A lot of these companies have a lot of equipment, and most of that equipment is not used 24/7. You might approach them. You got to be persistent and maybe a little brash, but you might find a way to get in and approach them and say, I sure would like to do a proof of principle. If I could use some of your equipment, I can offer you this or that, whether that's first right of first refusal down the road, or some kind of special pricing or something like that that might entice them. It's something you can look at, and I've done some of that where you just get access, and if you stay out of their way and just use the instrument and are able to get some proof of principle experiments established, then you can do that potentially without a high cost.
Yeah. I think if you spend some time Googling around and networking and asking about incubators and accelerators, you'll find there's actually a lot of them. And some are associated with universities, and Activate has setups at Berkeley and MIT and I think in Chicago somewhere at this point. And there's a thing called Greentown Labs. Actually Halliburton has one for clean tech, interestingly, down in Houston, where they try to bring in entrepreneurs and they can use their infrastructure. So a lot of companies and universities and other things, other accelerators will have these kind of arrangements with labs. And one thing I forgot to mention on the where do I get funding, and just on the off chance that nobody knows about this or people don't know about, there are all these angel clubs like Sandhill Angels and MIT Angels and Harvard Angels. A lot of universities have angel clubs where people who want to just put in 5 or 10 grand will form a special purpose vehicle to collect a bunch of people that might want to put in a little bit of money, but by themselves might not be ready or able to put in a $250,000 or $500,000 check. But those angel funds can kind of pool into a single entity and then invest early stage. So that's another option to check out.
Thank you. And as we start winding down on time, I wanted to ask what the single hardest challenge each of you has faced through this entrepreneurship process and strategies to overcome different roadblocks.
I know I have one answer to that. We had venture capital money, and as you heard already, venture capital typically has a fairly rigid timeline. So we're 5 years in. This is 2007, and they're starting to look at some exit. And so by the late 2007, we had 4 offers for our company, and we took the highest one, but the highest one had a catch, which was they would defer the actual acquisition for a year and base the sale price on our 2008 revenue. Anyway, that we decided, well, it was enough. It was like 50% higher than anything else, so we decided to take it. When what could go wrong? And well, you may remember that in 2008, the world had a huge recession, and the acquiring company in early 2009, when they had to make the final boom, they got cold feet and pulled out and said, "So what? Sue us." And anyway, so that began a 9-month journey. We did not have any cash, or maybe 100K or something. We had 30 people on the payroll. We had to find a way to keep the doors open long enough to find a new acquirer, and that was gut wrenching for that long a period. I certainly, all the senior management went without salary for 9 months, but we still needed to pay all the technicians and keep the company as a viable entity instead of, and it was a wounded company, but we eventually found an acquirer, and anyway, but that was by far the hardest thing I went through.
So I guess I'll jump in. So for me, we raised a Series B back in 2021, and finally had some money in the bank, and we had been growing like this, and I thought that would keep going. And it actually, just as soon as the money hit the bank, our growth flatlined for a bit, for like 6 months, and then it was slower growth the next year. And so I got way over my skis on the cost structure, and so we actually lost $1 million in a single month in I think it was January of 2022, and I had to start, and we never did mass layoffs, but we had to like really tighten our belt, and we reduced a couple people here and there, and we just had to grow into our revenue, and so for that, what amounted to 2 years, my excessive confidence, based upon the first few years of growth, misled me, and I made a big strategic mistake of hiring too quickly. And then correcting that, we nearly died. We got down to $50,000, and I had to take a mortgage and all sorts of stuff. It was real touch and go for a while, and it was because I hadn't seen that interest rates were going to rise, and capital markets were going to dry up, and the semiconductor market was going to have a rough year, and electrical vehicle market was going to have a rough year, and I just didn't see it coming, and nearly killed the company. Which goes a little bit with the overall theme for the whole 8 years, is finding capital partners who really see the vision. If it's a non-traditional, if you're up the center of the fairway, so to speak, for VCs, then it's a different game. But if you've got a weird story and what you're trying to build is kind of not exactly fitting their pattern match, it's a tough capital journey. And so I always have ambitions that are kind of misaligned with the size checks that I've been able to get people to write. I want $100 million checks, and people want to write me $1 million checks.
I see we're just about out of time, so I'll be fast. And obviously, Six Line is much younger than Tom or Craig's company, so we haven't had as severe probably near misses to catastrophic failure to the company as they have. But I will say, like, one of the key core employees that we had in the beginning at Six Line. He brought a lot of industry experience, and he was, added a lot of legitimacy to our company. And he was going to be working on the STTR that we got from the NSF. And so he had an initial, equity contract, and then we were adding more equity, and he was like going back and forth and negotiating with us on that. And then it was like we were negotiating it, and then the next day he was like, actually, I just took another job opportunity offer in the area. And so that was kind of kind of like a gut punch, because we had been, talking to this person, and like he was kind of core to our team for so long, that it was, how are we going to replace this person and find someone to do the STTR work? But we were able to, do a fast hiring process and find people. But yeah, I will say that, one of my mentors, he always says that each startup has like 7 near misses before the company either dies or succeeds. And so he just like keeps a tally on his board of the near misses that the company undergoes. So if you're going through a company and you have a near miss, just tally it and add it up to the board and see what happens in the long term.
Thank you. That is a really good piece of advice. I love that. Even though I'm not an entrepreneur, I think that's great. But I wanted to thank everyone for coming today to our webinar. And the panelists are open to being contacted. Their contact information is shown on the slide on our screen. So please feel free to reach out if you have any further comments or questions to engage in conversation with them. But of course, make sure that this is genuine business ideas and not just looking for a job at their startups, unless maybe conversations lead that way. But we also want to remind you to please remember to complete the survey after this webinar is completed. And your feedback is both important and appreciated for making sure that we deliver desired scheduled programming in the future. So thank you for logging on, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Rachel.